All right, I think we are live. Assuming all this is working. We're still figuring it out.
Yes.
All right, well, hello everybody. Welcome to Everyday Sacred, episode 2 of our YouTube live stream. I'm trying to re-record the episodes but basically I'm trying to put our previous episodes we've done up onto YouTube soon here. Although obviously most without video, so we'll get the audio component up there. But yeah, today we are doing a live stream, and we had a few things we could talk about and kind of go over. So Shane, how have you been?
I'm doing well. It does look like the stream is up.
Woo! Well, at least we did that. I'm sharing
there's a window in it that's kind of odd. It looks like Brave or something.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, this window here. That's the... I had some websites I was going to share.
Okay.
And, I've got some random things and anything else you want to pop up. Right now it's a pretty picture of jellyfish, which everybody likes jellyfish, unless they've been stung by them, then maybe they are terrified. I lived in Florida, and people would get stung to death swimming, so there were some rough times.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was... At first it looked like a speed test, and I was like...
Yeah. I wanted to wow everyone with my Comcast internet. Not that we're sponsored by anybody or anything except ourselves, but that's good enough. So how you been? How was your week?
It's been nice. I've been doing some projects, spent some time up on Whitby, starting to clean up the old family farm.
That is awesome. I love the farm. It's a beautiful place, and who knows, maybe if we get to develop this more, we'll even maybe one day do events there or something.
Oh, I can only dream.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I also got to visit Port Townsend, which is one of my favorite places in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, that commonly pops up as like one of the 10 cities to retire in the United States. I've seen that a couple times. Which would make you think that there's not a lot of young people out there, but there actually is. And
yeah,
I got to say, for so if you live in Washington or you're familiar, we've got this thing called the peninsula, right? It's kind of, well, like Forks is out there. I think there was some vampire book series based on that.
Oh yes, Twilight.
Twilight, thank you. They had shiny vampires that lived in Forks. And, it's just very remote. It's a little... People out there still say Washington and Crick, and, they're nice people. They're nice people. But there's a lot of, like, native communities. There's several tribes out there. And then you also have a lot of, like, old school, live in the woods, mostly white communities. But Port Townsend is a really good balance, I think. Like, you can relate to it if you're a young hippie kind of, like into organic foods and small community feel, but very accepting, and I mean, it just feels like a progressive kind of fun place for what it is, and great Thai food. I mean, that's number one.
Surprisingly great Thai food.
Yeah, like a family with their family recipes from that particular region in Thailand, making these dishes that you can't get anywhere else ever, and
it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
First place I take people in Port Townsend is that.
Yeah. There's some decent coffee shops. One got invaded by hipsters. I'll be honest. I went there and it was like being at a co-op, which was good. I'm not trying to put down co-ops. Co-ops are only some degree away from being invaded by hipsters at any given point, though. And but I went back like a year and a half later. We were visiting some friends, and I remember I went in and it's playing this like quasi techno Parisian cafe music, and some guys like doing the biggest flourish I've ever seen, pouring hot water into this like tea strainer coffee thing. He's like, and this other white 20-year-old goes up to another white 20-year-old guy, and he's like, dude, I just love your ink, man. Can I see that? And he's like, yeah, check it out. And it's all this like tribal Native American art that he's tattooed all over his arms. And I just couldn't breathe. I'm like, get me the fuck out of here. Like right now. And I was just traumatized by it. It was like everything wrong with the world in a second. But that's one like coffee shop.
The circus show version of it.
It was bad.
I believe that coffee shop was recommended to me because it's where a lot of like community activists will gather there and have those conversations, which gets a blend of the people who are social active and the people who want to stand next to the people who are socially active.
Granted, well, you know, like it's been 2 years since then, or a year at least, probably about a year. So, I mean, it's a dynamic place, and it is changing, and that's what's cool about it is you go to, like, Port Angeles out there, and it always seems kind of like Port Angeles. Like, if there's 10 years between visits, you can't tell the difference. I mean, not to put Port Angeles down. I know it's a community, and they're doing their own thing.
I enjoy Port Angeles, too. It's a small little old town. It's more spread out. It's really adjacent to the forest.
It's a great stop on the way to the forest. It's
always sort of been Port Townsend. You know, there's a few places I remember. There's a pizza place I've been going to since I was a little kid, walking over on the ferry.
Mm-hmm.
Still there. And,
yeah, I love that place.
And it's one of the oldest towns in Washington State, like one of the 5 oldest townships in the state. It's older than Seattle.
Yeah.
But it's also young and vibrant. So.
Yeah. Yeah. In a place where, you know, most of the places don't feel young and vibrant. They feel more conservative and, you know, like traditional, and not to put those. I mean, I can't even say that without feeling like I'm putting a negative spin on things, and I don't mean to, but
yeah, it's hard with a word like conservative.
It is. I mean, so many connotations. It doesn't
necessarily mean like politically conservative, but it sort of has taken on that.
Yeah, and if people spend a lot of time trying to not identify with the word conservative. And so you automatically think of it as a bad word. Depending on who you are, maybe some people think of it as a great word and flock to that banner.
Right. I mean, politically conservative people are proud to say that they are conservative.
Mm-hmm.
To them, it does not have a negative connotation, but it does have a specific connotation.
It does. Yeah. That's gone way beyond what anybody who was using it, like, even probably 50 years ago really was trying to tag onto it.
It has always meant sort of a resistance to change,
mm-hmm.
and that's sort of the implication that you were talking about. Like some of the small towns in Washington, they might be politically liberal, oddly enough, but the town culture is on the conservative side. It doesn't change much over time.
Yeah, I think here in Washington we still see ourselves. We still have like the little bit of that pioneer spirit, you know, of the like frontier kind of spirit. And I think, I mean, we're not that frontier-y anymore, but so we like to.
We're one of the last frontier regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were, and it's left its mark. And I mean, you can still get mauled by black bears and moose and stuff out there. So, I mean, in that sense, it feels pretty frontier, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to go. We all like to vacation there. As far as I know, I've never met somebody from Washington who's like, I would never go out to the peninsula. I mean, it's a fun place to be. The whole rainforest alone is like something I think everybody should see in their life if they have the opportunity. But today, one of the things we wanted to talk about was language. You know, kind of fitting in with what we were saying about how the word conservative has taken on all these meanings and gone beyond its original intention as describing anything. You know, now
that's a really good. It's a good word to sort of start with because it at its root is the word conserve,
Mm-hmm.
and in that ways, I've always been like, if it didn't have the political connotations, I might say I was more conservative because I want to, I want to conserve natural resources,
Yeah.
and I do want to conserve culture, diverse cultures. I don't want to, I don't want to a hegemony of culture that spreads out over everything.
Yeah. That would
And
be weird. And
right,
like maybe we even identify as conservationists or have that kind
and,
of feel,
and
right?
that's where the cousin of that word has sort of come to be like an environmentalist, a conservationist. I want to conserve resources. I want to conserve for the future,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to preserve
Absolutely.
some cultures. Like Port Townsend is a place I love. It's got all this old architecture. You can tell it definitely has um, pretty strict guidelines on development in the waterfront district.
Yeah.
There's not every building there is 100 years old, but the newer buildings still fit the vibe.
Yeah, they got kind of
So
that
in that,
Victorian.
they preserve the historic character of the waterfront district.
And it gives it a charm, It gives it like a feel. We got a bit of that in Washington, I think, and other places have it too. But like we have a town here called Leavenworth, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
like it's like
great
a
example.
Bavarian mountain village kind of. And I mean you can still go to McDonald's there. It's a popular destination for people skiing and camping and hiking and all those things, but your
Fun.
McDonald's will look like a Bavarian
It's
building.
so funny
It is weird. um,
because of those strict development guidelines. There's a term for it right now that I'm blanking on, but
yeah.
the sort of Main Street guidelines, and the McDonald's in Leavenworth is really notable because it looks like an old German grandfather clock.
Like they sell fancy chocolates or something. I don't know, but it's McDonald's and they sell the Big Mac just like anywhere else. um, yeah, I've heard of some places like that all around the world, but it's still just trippy when you walk into them sometimes, and that's an extreme example. But Port Townsend, yeah, definitely has the feel. It's not so artificial, it just like their old theater and some of the old hotels and stuff you can stay at are really charming. I love the marinas are famous, the boatyard there, and um,
Right, and they have a thriving wooden boat building industry, which,
yeah,
to my knowledge, there's a handful left in the
yeah.
country and probably the world.
And again, even that has like a charm because it's this like conservative effort to keep something alive that, I mean, yeah, everybody builds out of fiberglass and stuff nowadays, but
Yeah.
there's something about it that makes it a little more like something to be treasured, I think. um,
So yeah, you and I are both big sort of etymology geeks in a lot of ways, like the roots of language and finding the cousins of words like conserve and preserve. It has always interested us. We've had interesting conversations after a couple of drinks where we'll just trace a word down and look it up and go back to its ancient lineages and find like its roots in Latin or Greek, or going farther than back to like the Proto-Indian, Iranian.
yeah, the Indo-European
Yeah,
root, and by doing that, by going back that far, sometimes it answers questions like that you wouldn't expect, like what deities were first present in the original Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European society that has influenced most of the world at this point. Um, even countries completely unconnected to those groups are like some of the scripts and stuff from religious texts from India spread throughout Asia and created a lot of the scripts that we see, things like hiragana, katakana, ancient Filipino scripts like Bayan or You know, some of the words escape me, but like literally all over Southeast Asia, Asia, you see people
Right.
influenced by the Indo-European culture that would go everywhere, and we can, yeah, we could see like what gods were in that religion and what their names probably were, you know.
Right. And so if you're not familiar with that, I would say I would definitely advise looking up. There's actually not a ton of information about the culture. We don't have a name for the culture. We have the region. It's sort of Iranian, Indian, sort of.
Yeah, I think
Western
recently,
China.
it's called like the Command culture. Let me
But what we
destroy.
do know is the legacy of words as distant as, you know, Indian Sanskrit and Western
Yamanya.
European English,
It's
with very similar words and roots.
absolutely, yeah. It's the Yamnaya Faces of the Indo-Europeans. There's a little YouTube documentary. I strongly suggest this one. It's really good. Um, I've seen that and it's fun. A lot of, I mean, I don't know how accurate all of it is, but definitely enjoy that show. And let me close that. I think so. They think that was the actual culture originally.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what we named them, because we
Yeah.
don't know what they called themselves, as you said. Like we can give people names all the time, but you know, to really get theirs. But what do we know? Like they domesticated horses, they had cows. You know, apparently they had no writing. We're pretty sure about that, and we can tell again because all the Indo-European cultures have different words for writing. Where if they did have writing, we
Uh-huh.
probably would all have words related to the same word for writing, like we do for water, and a lot of them for horses, like to carry a load or a yoke, which is related to the word yoga. Um,
Is it also related? It's not related to the egg yolk, is it? Or are they all interrelated?
that I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Um, I
But I
don't
have
know.
heard that the yoke for a horse is similar to the yoke for yourself in yoga. Maybe hard to say
Yeah,
the levels of etymology, but
I've got no degree in Sanskrit, but I definitely have heard that more than once from many different sources. I mean, sometimes these things get picked up, especially in like new age cultures or groups and stuff,
oh yeah,
and they disseminate the information for 20 years, and it's never right and to begin with.
oh
But
yeah. New age etymology is always you cringe a little bit.
oh yeah, especially if they're talking about Lumeria or Atlantis or something, it's just like, oh man.
Even just like they're like the word for disease is like it's just a lack of ease.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, and we laugh about it. The problem is that it's notoriously damaging for a lot of different cultures out there when people don't honor the actual roots and connections between these things and instead make up mythical ones or just attribute it to aliens or something.
Oh
And
yeah.
they rob people of the prestige that their culture rightly deserves for being part of that puzzle, And so yeah, it is something to pay attention to and care about how those sources are and like where they came from and really give people credit where it's due and not say crazy crap like aliens built the pyramids because the Egyptians never could have built anything like that on their own or something where you're like, well, that
Or that
sounds
the Mesopotamians worship fish gods. Doesn't quite ring true. I mean,
yeah,
maybe we can bring someone on our show one day who can make that argument. There's plenty of people on YouTube who have. And
mm-hmm.
I would happily have that conversation because it's interesting. I'm not
Yeah.
going to deny that. But like you said, it feels almost like a cousin of cultural appropriation, but more like erasure. Right?
Definitely.
The Egyptians could not have been smart enough to do this. The Mesopotamians could not have been smart enough to develop the agricultural irrigation systems that they had
Yeah.
without extraterrestrial. When and they did worship gods, but if you study anthropologically, as you started to do, like the gods were often a natural respect for the world.
Yeah, I mean, they were an aspect of their environment that, like Enki being that fresh, clean, drinkable water, and a place that's very arid, like it's an appreciation for your environment that makes sense.
That would be a blessing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And human beings have always been able to recognize miraculous events, things we don't want to take credit for.
Yeah. And, those of us that never learn to be grateful for the things that nature gives us just, I think, really don't live the same kind of happy lives that many of us, that you would if you took a moment to really appreciate and slow down. And it really ties into that honoring the sacred life, and making time for it and room for it in your life. And so sometimes when you just attribute things to aliens, you really rob yourself of that appreciation of nature and the planet you're like on and the environment you live in, and honoring the people that came before us. I mean, we live in the United States, and we're notorious for just stepping over the natives that lived here, and we use the names of the mountains and stuff we name our breweries after it. And most of us don't really know what the name even meant or what they were doing with those words or the name of the culture the word came from,
Right.
Like, I don't know. And so everything becomes richer and deeper and just so much more full of depth if you take that little time to know those little things.
And it's especially, I don't know, damning when those people are still around to tell their stories.
I know, they're not gone either,
Like, I could wonder what the ancient Egyptians were up to. The people living in Egypt right now have very little relation to them. I can wonder about the Mesopotamians, the Iranians, and the Iraqis have very little relation to them. But
culturally, there's a lot of difference.
Of Washington or of the United States are still around, and I'm sure they've lost a lot of their history. They didn't have much of a written language, but the stories are still being told.
Mm-hmm.
They're diminished, but
well, they have new stories.
As a European person living here, I am interested in hearing those stories and in hearing those languages, even if it needs to be translated for me, and from the source, not. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and it's true. And I mean, it's dangerous ground to tread onto because one of the tools, a long-time tools of colonists, or colonizers, I should say, to subjugate other people was to tell them that they didn't have a strong connection to their past. And you see this a lot. I mean, go to the British Museum and just try and look around at some of the stuff and their refusals to repatriate some of that material, and why, what's the reason for it? Like, well, those were the people before you and don't really belong to your culture, so it doesn't make any sense to give these back to you,
Yeah.
And
which I guess is sort of almost the argument I just made in terms of I can't talk to an ancient Egyptian.
Well, sometimes it's right, though, right? I mean, it's
it's important to find that nuance.
Absolutely. In the Middle East was a great example because a lot of populations have moved into the Middle East and pushed out the people that are more traditional. We can get into things like the Marsh Arabs and stuff like that too. And
yeah, I would love to. We could do a whole episode on the Marsh Arabs. It's fascinating.
Absolutely, So it's not like there's no people there.
Name for them. It sounds almost derogatory, but that's just
the
name.
The question is, like, when does a culture die? Even though the people might live on, right? That's a hard thing to answer. It's not very clear, and it might have different definitions for different people. And it kind of ties into some of the stuff I wanted to talk about language. But we'll get to that. I think we'll step it back. I was joking with Shane that we need to start a new segment of this show called Mike and Shane Tell You What's Wrong with the World, where we just complain about things. And
that's part of the live stream. It's a little more current.
Yeah, and I would not do it if I was trying to teach about...
Yeah, this is a well-researched topic.
Exactly.
If it's on, it might be on something that bothers us, but it'll be a deeper look at it.
Absolutely. So, I'll look up here. Oh. I ran into this article online, and it stood out to me because I actually think it's terrible and destroying the world and highly offensive. But I'll explain why. Because on the surface of it, it doesn't seem like a big deal. And, you know, had I not taken classes in, like, linguistic anthropology and stuff, I don't know that it would have jumped out at me as being the thing that makes me feel a certain way. And I'm not saying that all linguistic anthropologists will hate this the way I do. Hate's a strong word. But, I mean, I would like to talk about my problems with it. And, you know, as you pointed out, the first thing is the title. Like...
Yeah. The title's the one that sticks out to me as troublesome. As a clickbait title, it's not representative of the article, really.
Definitely, you know, a thing. Like, the decline of English. So right away, we've got something that's... I mean... It seems like it's set to incite some people to freak out.
It's an inflammatory title. And it before clicking, and I saw this headline actually before you sent the article, and I immediately was like, oh, it's going to be an article about like Gen Z's like lingo about music or something. And I was like, whatever. I'll pass The Economist, thanks.
Yeah, right, because it's The Economist. And I'm not the biggest fan. So, I mean, so what it talks about, it goes into Bad Bunny, talks about the English-speaking world, whose verses are usually in Spanish and on one occasion Japanese. Basically, he was a highly played artist of 2020, 2021. Number one on Spotify. I mean, they call it the world's largest music streaming platform, and I don't, from the numbers I looked up, that doesn't seem to be correct. You know?
No.
Well, apparently like 44 to 50% of people on the internet, if they look up music, they do it on YouTube. And not even YouTube Music. It's like actual
YouTube Music. They just look on YouTube.
Yeah, so Spotify maybe has like 27%, I think, of the share. Well, from polls that I've seen, where about 50% use YouTube. I mean, everybody... Yeah. YouTube's the biggest music streaming service, even if it does other things.
That might be in the word music streaming, is that YouTube's music is a streaming platform. But it's true. I have YouTube Music. I had Spotify in the past, and I'll still look up individual songs on regular YouTube.
Yeah.
And then I learn the artist and maybe add it on my music platform. But
absolutely, but I think they definitely do podcasts. And after this, I might bring up the Joe Rogan stuff and get your feelings about that. Because why not? You know, we're gonna talk about it. Everybody's got to have an opinion. So I don't think they're number one, but that's fine. That's not a big deal. And then it's like such success might have been harder to achieve 30 years ago. And, you know, part of me wonders about that because it doesn't make any sense to me. There wasn't really music streaming 30 years ago. And
how would we...
How do you quantify that, you know? Like,
yeah, like, would they... 30 years ago, they wouldn't have got a lot of radio play on on American radio stations.
Sure, right? I mean, except...
But they could be on every radio station in the Spanish sphere.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, so growing up, there was this guy named Ricky Martin,
Heard
and
of it?
yeah, I mean, super popular. There was this band called Sublime, songs entirely in Spanish, very famous. Everybody listened to them. Um, I mean, even going back in time, I think when I was a little kid, that biopic about what's his name, the guy that sang La Bamba and got famous, Valens or something, Richie Valens or.
Valens, yeah.
That came out, so everybody listened to. I remember when I was like 8, I think everybody was playing La Bamba like crazy.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that biopic too. That was huge.
Yeah, another American artist who released a song in Spanish because he was of more Spanish descent, and that was the second time it was topping charts because it was also popular when it was released. I mean, I think there's a long history of Spanish songs even being popular, especially Puerto Rican artists.
Right, Puerto Rican, they're Americans. And
yes.
Many of us recognize that. There's sometimes a cultural pushback to not, and they're unfortunately not well recognized at the federal level, but...
Absolutely. People still call them Spanish.
You can recognize Puerto Ricans as Americans. They are American citizens.
They are.
And large Puerto Rican populations in New York and other places. West Side Story told me a lot about that as a young child.
Yeah. It's a good educator.
Yeah.
So I'll just go on here. And they got, they show a lot of things that are not, as far as I can tell, really backed up by a lot of things. So we're talking about, November 12th to, when this came out. Roughly a year. And then they got a bunch of strange mumbo-jumbo that I don't really know. It says, examining 13,000 hits in 70 language, along with other data like genre, lyrical language, nationality of the artist, which, I would be interested to see what they attribute Bad Bunny to. They name another artist, too, who is also Puerto Rican, although they don't mention that. But, they're United States citizens, but that's fine. So they give... Basically, what they say here, 3 broad clusters emerged, from the data. And they make it sound like they didn't do it. But just so you know, we decided to separate the entire world into 3 groups. People that speak English, people that speak Spanish, and then those crazy people that would listen to songs in local languages.
Yeah. Whatever that may be.
Yeah, whatever crazy... And some of it, let me go up here. The way they say it too. Indigenous music cultures. They use the word, they say, in the local tongue. Which some of these are kind of like loaded terms that give a sense of uncivilizedness to it, In my opinion, I think it's... But yeah, again, Raul Alejandro is, again, as far as I know, Puerto Rican. He's not Spanish. Yeah, I mean, he's... So the thing... My problem with this, and then we can go down and look at their data, You got BTS, the Korean pop group, which their music is in English. I mean, another problem I have with all this is that they say, we only attributed every song, whether it was in English and another language, to one language. And so you're like, but why though? And they make it sound like their algorithm. Yeah, like their algorithm couldn't somehow do that. Explain. So here we go, yeah. Each song is only labeled with one language. Where the song contains more than one language, our automated method makes our best guess. Which I don't know what that means, Does it just put all the words together and then see if it looks more Spanish or English at the end? I don't know. It's not exactly clear. So, anyways, you've got the Spanish group. You've got the English group, and the local language group. So some of these, I'm not even sure, like the Netherlands looks like it mostly listens to music in another group. But my problem is, first of all, it's incredibly artificial, I think, to divide the entire world into 3 groups. To say, well, there's
the three colors, right?
Yeah.
Red, yellow, and blue.
Blue is English, yellow is Spanish, red is everything else. So, I mean,
data is very interesting, I've got to say.
Yeah. But what they're trying to say is that, right now, because English is losing its hold on the media world, you've got people listening to music in their own languages in their own countries, and places where English is a common and dominant language, or they lack their own, pop music scene. People are listening to more English. I also wonder if some of this can't obviously be attributed to a better lack of high-speed internet. I mean, not everybody could stream music videos all the time, all over the world. And as places like Mexico and South America have more access to more reliable high-speed internet and devices capable of actually showing these things, if it's not obvious that they will become more popular than they are last year, And that's never mentioned in this.
Internet access increases.
Absolutely. And good, high-quality internet access, because streaming music videos is not easy to do, right? Spotify does just music, right? But at the same time, it's like it takes a lot to have steady. It's not dial-up, like you need cell phones and things like that to really get access to some of this stuff. And as countries do, they make it seem like it's directly detracting from English because people listen to music in the language that they speak. And I think it's absurd as an argument. And yes, it makes sense if you divide the entire world into 3 different groups, then you can definitely see that, whoa, what's happening to the dominance of English, right? And English dominance, they're saying 30 years ago, was this like surefire thing. Let's see. I'm going to jump on YouTube here. Oh, yeah. I'm going to try and show a YouTube video. I don't know if this will work, but let me know.
I won't be able to see it except through the stream.
Oh. Do you want to look it up?
No, that's all right.
Okay. This video is called The 14 Most Spoken Languages in the World. It goes from 1900 to 2020. And what's interesting about it is English does not become the most spoken language until 2014. I'm really ruining it for people that are watching the video and they're seeing these little bars fill up. So the point of all this is the idea of language being more dominant in the past, of English being more dominant in the past, is just not very true. English is becoming far more dominant in the future rather than the past. And in fact, it wasn't until like 7 or 8 years ago it was the most spoken language in the world. Now, I mean, there's a lot unspoken about these charts that are playing. We're talking about people that speak any Like if English was their second language, as opposed to, if they're monolingual and only speak Chinese. Mandarin Chinese is incredibly popular because there are so many people in China. But a lot of Chinese people, yeah, outside of China, not a lot of people speak Mandarin Chinese compared to English, which is an official language in so many countries all over the world, including places in Asia like the Philippines. It's the national language. One of them. Oh, very dramatic, it continues. I'm totally jumping ahead. We're in 1989. And you can see that, Hindi is way behind. We've entered into the 90s. This is Ricky Martin territory here. I remember. 98, he's definitely on the scene. He's living La Vida Loca.
So it's interesting that you mentioned in the article it talks about not the decline of the English language, as I assume the language was part of the decline of English hegemony. But then this is pointing out that English hegemony, struggle with that word, might actually be on the rise.
It's part of the future rather than the past, right? And yes, I will admit that in media, English is very dominant, and for maybe.
Sure. I mean, American and British governments have invested heavily into our cultural hegemony throughout the 20th century as part of the Cold War strategy.
Absolutely.
And it's continued, and it's built these massive industries that are now profitable on their own.
Sure.
They don't need as much intervention.
Well, we're at the forefront of a lot of things. I think something like 90% of the internet is in English. Because we created some of the first web pages.
That's probably why it finally usurped China, which I'm coming up on right now. I'm watching it as well. 2012, there it is, 2013.
Yep, 2014. I kind of paused it here on our stream to kind of show that was the moment. I'll let it play out.
And then it jumps.
Yes.
For the last 7 years after 2013,
leaving
skyrockets ahead of China.
Exactly. And this is the last 30 years that they're talking about, and you're like, yeah, I don't think that English is in danger here,
Right, so English started out in third place, right? Look at the beginning.
Yeah, if you go back, English was third, but behind Spanish because of Spain's colonies, of course.
But you're right. The modern internet, the language of science, the language of commerce are all in English.
Absolutely.
It is the most important language in the world. I remember reading an article, probably senior year in high school, so 2000, 2001, that talked about the rise of Chinese, which, to be fair, Chinese culture has been on the ascendant for some time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was saying that, and it sort of was also like bemoaning that English would not be the dominant world language by now, really.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's actually become more dominant.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's that same old thing, like the idea that white people will become a minority in America soon, right? And I think it was Stephen Colbert. I always would laugh my ass off because when he would say it, he's like, we're becoming a minority in everything except numbers. Like, yeah, like in every way except mathematically, we're the minority, and you're like, yeah. Well, that sounds about right. And again, it's the same argument. So people make that argument, and I've had people in my home making it to me, which, I'm half white. I don't really. Anyways, I'm like, that is only true.
In European culture as well.
Yeah, but it's only true if you take every other racial group in the United States, stick them in a group and say, not white people.
Yeah.
And then you're like, we're a minority now, right? Because, but you're still bigger than any other group in the entire country by a lot.
And that would, so that's true if you are non-white as 50%.
Yeah.
Well, let's just clean cut it. It's not even. You're actually probably more than 50% white.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah. We'll say that.
but then it would also include your son, who's 25%.
Sure. Yeah.
He would be lumped into the non-white category.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not in there.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is why.
Potentially his offspring.
Yeah. And that's the thing is it's like that's not a real comparison to make a minority. I don't really understand. And if you're only going to be comfortable if everybody else in the country is a smaller, put together, doesn't equal you, that's a strange place to be. That's all I'm saying.
That reminds me, I'm increasingly starting to push back against just the label and the concept of whiteness.
Yeah.
It's such a cultural construct.
And sticking all white people in a group?
Right. It limits people of like European and North and Asian, Caucasian.
Yeah, it includes Jews and Middle Eastern, people, like people who really don't identify with the stereotypes of white culture,
Right, because we're and it's such a cultural construct. And before the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, the concept of whiteness didn't exist. It was invented largely as a divisive tactic because in colonial America, and there's a lot of research into this. If we talk more about race in another episode, I would love to bring a lot to it.
Sure.
But there was rising solidarity among the working class people, as there often is when left to their own devices.
Sure.
Which included the early
Italians and Irish
African slaves, the Irish and English indentured prisoners,
mm-hmm.
and they were starting to band together, and like the folks over in Virginia were like, no, they're going to rise up. We need to give the white people more rights and make it life harder for the black people.
Yeah.
So they started it started back in the 1600s, like within decades of the slave trade beginning. Prior to that, like, people have always been very tribal. It's a human trait. But we would identify by our specific tribes and nations, which were far more diverse than even the countries of today. It would be the city-states. It would be your family, your clan. If you look at Italy's a good example where they still largely identify by the regions of Italy.
Mm-hmm. They
might be Italians if they're talking to an American, but if they're talking to an Italian, they're a Venetian.
Yeah.
and so the concept of whiteness is so artificial, and the fact that people are now championing it and defending it, and it's just such an utter lie.
Yeah.
And I feel the same, like, the label Asian is just as bad. Asia's the largest continent. That includes, Middle Easterners, Indians, Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders, East Asians, and Russians. They're all Asian.
Well, and it doesn't include most Pacific Islanders. There's some, I think, by Indonesia. I mean, so here's the thing. In my opinion, the problem is that we've taken geographical areas and we've turned them into race labels. And then the government puts it on a piece of paper and mails it to you. And so I'm part Filipino. My mom's Filipino Guamanian. And there's this big debate most people probably aren't even aware of. But so I've always identified that my mother's heritage with Asian and Pacific Islander.
Yeah, which is the large subgroup, API.
Yeah. But the thing is, so a lot of Filipinos in the United States will sometimes identify as Pacific Islanders. And it will piss off Hawaiian people and other Pacific Islander people because they don't think that Filipino people should be labeled as Pacific Islanders because they are technically Asian peoples.
They're closer to the continent.
Yeah, so they're definitely part of Asia, and people, as I understand it, in the Philippines, because I'm a Filipino American, I'm not, I'm going to the Philippines hopefully this year, but I've heard that among Filipinos in the Philippines, they generally consider themselves Asian pretty uniformly. They really don't have the problem of identifying themselves as not Asian. And in fact, they don't like that Filipino people in America do it because they think that there's a problem with creating a distance between the other Asian nations around them and not and really standing apart. The thing is, the Philippines is a little different, obviously, than countries right next to them, and they really don't bother themselves sometimes with what's going on in the greater Asia area and see themselves as even kind of very different. They've had a long history of Spanish colonization, American colonization. Yeah, I mean it's
called the Philippines.
Absolutely, they're named after King Philip. And they there's a lot of Spanish spoken over. Excuse me. There's a lot of Spanish spoken over there. Right. I think there's a lot of people that judge them for those things, right? I mean,
right.
And if we're getting into language, it's like how you identify yourself has all these meanings, and especially to Americans, because like I said, it's not a significant problem in the Philippines. Like, Hawaiians aren't pissed off at the Philippines themselves. It's like Filipino Americans. Now, I'm a special case because Guamanians are technically Pacific Islanders, and Filipinos are Asian. And so, since I'm Filipino and Asian, although even that, I say that, but it's complicated because if you're talking about genetics, there's no difference really between a Guamanian, a Chamorro person from Micronesia, from Oceania, right, and a Filipino. Because we're both Austronesian. All the Guamanians mostly came from the Philippines. It's complicated. There were many migrations, and there were different waves of migration into Guam and back and forth. But yeah, we're the same people, and our cultures are incredibly similar. The Chamorro language and Tagalog are both Austronesian. They're very similar. I think some words are definitely cognates, but it's like Romance languages, where there's a lot in common. Maybe you can't speak it just because you know it, but there's elements of it that make a lot of sense to you, and the word for chicken is amazingly similar, and so on. Manok. But I definitely, I see the problems that it creates, and a lot of people, Filipinos don't understand why Americans do that. But part of that is they don't know what it's like here and the stereotypes involved in being an Asian versus the stereotypes of being a Pacific Islander. And
which are, if anything, more positive stereotypes.
Exactly. Like, generally it's seen as being more positive to be a Pacific Islander. We think of Hawaiians,
I don't even know why that is, but I feel that.
Well, things like World War II. I mean, there was a war, and it's also, I think, the Filipinos got it really bad in World War II, and I don't, not all, and they kind of got screwed by a lot of people, including the United States, despite, I know that there's a love for MacArthur and everything, and that's history, but there's a lot of different viewpoints going on here, and even to this day, you still find all over actual linguists calling the Filipino Tagalog like a Creole language of Spanish, right? And same with Chamorro. I see that all the time.
It has a lot of Spanish.
Yeah, but
adopteds.
Again, I think that is something that is. It's ironic to me that you have an English-speaking person saying, "Well, you don't even have your original real language because it's been so influenced and like 30% of your vocabulary is Spanish, and so therefore
English is like the OG Creole language.
Exactly. I mean, 30% of the language is like French, you know? I mean, but
it's French, Latin, German, Celtic.
Yeah. But that same linguist would never he would never call English a Creole language. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
but if you look at the roots, it's a few hundred years farther back to when it is a Creole language. It's really like we decided a cutoff point. We're like, well, English was established by Shakespeare.
And English is the language, right? I mean, like, I think
we saw a chart.
Exactly, we saw that, and I think it has a lot to do with ideas of dominance and race and I mean all this stuff that is not being uniformly applied, and we're not, obviously the thing is with Creole languages, they do exist. There is a Spanish Filipino Creole language called Chavacano in the Philippines, but that's when you get that when the grammar starts to change, and when there's no irregularities and stuff in the language. It's kind of complicated, and it's beyond my pay grade to explain. But I do want to talk why. One of the reasons this like Spotify article that the Economist put out bothers me is because there's a lot of people in the United States, and if you don't live here, you might not even know, but there's this like English only movement. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, yeah.
So do you know what the official language of the United States is?
There isn't one.
Exactly. And that's like, there's a reason there isn't one. Because we are a language of like immigrants and like peoples that lived here before us all stuck together. And if we decided...
It was very intentional on the framers'
Very
part.
intentional. And not to mention that it's stupid to make laws regarding it, because once a state like Arizona had like 58% Spanish-speaking citizens, they would just change the law. And since a law was already in place, they would have there would be that history to do that, There would be, what do you call it in law when... There would be a... I don't know.
Precedent?
Yeah, there'd be a precedent for changing an official language, and eventually...
There was one, right.
Exactly. So, keeping
it would be decided at a state level, like...
And there are states that have official languages, but our government has definitely never gone ahead and been like, you need to speak this language to communicate with the government of the United States.
There's been pushes. There was definitely push in the Trump administration.
I've heard that there's been over 100 laws put together that have all been shot down for hundreds of years now. I mean, like, nobody...
To try to make English the language?
Yeah, I mean, so here's an example, right? The English Language Unity Act of 2019, okay? And so, it was, you can see the language here, and none of it says, like, get Spanish out. Like, they're not going to say that. But you can see right away, like, this exists to do a thing. And then, in a not so covert way, you've got other places. Here's just a news story from 2019 about how Arizona's bilingual... the banned bilingual education laws are finally getting lifted so that people can teach in multiple languages. But yeah, in this country, we got a real problem with accepting other languages. We've got...
Would you mind dropping some of these links into the chat?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Because I think, for myself and anyone who watches this in the future...
Absolutely.
Because these are interesting articles.
Yeah, I just searched for them real quick. A lot of mine went down. But
right.
Let's see. Let me throw these in the chat.
Once we're rich and famous, these websites, might not be accurate anymore because it could take a while.
Absolutely. So here's a couple in the chat. And yeah, they're worth looking at to see the language. I mean, people have tried to even pass laws against teaching other languages in high school. you know?
the 4 language credits.
Yes.
Like
Like,
America is already so bad at that.
like we don't need to be any worse. And I mean, so to take a break from explaining what's wrong with the world, because I think I've done that and I've ranted long enough, and I haven't even touched the surface of all the things I want to say about it. But I do think everybody should spend some time learning another language, and you know, like, it's just my opinion, but I really, there's a guy that I love to follow who teaches Chamorro. His name's Michael Bavacoa, I think. And he has this quote. I had it up, but I lost it, unfortunately. The page was up. But he talks about how, you know, a language is like the soul of the culture. And the way that those people interact. Like, if you want to learn about another culture, the most intimate way to do that is to learn their language and learn to think in their language and really explore them. And it sucks because, you know, I mean, it's a personal thing for me. Like, I never learned Chamorro, and I wish that my mother had taught me more, but she didn't know much Chamorro, and the reason for that is because the U.S. government made it illegal to speak. Right after World War II, when they came in, they banned it out in the schools, and you would be punished for speaking Chamorro, and the language was considered, you know, barbaric and subhuman, and so it was, they were trying to get rid of it.
Unbelievable that so recently we just passed laws like that without really even thinking. Like, it was just standard practice.
Yeah.
That was decades after we'd been doing it on the continent.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, and Puerto Ricans, they went through the same thing. They had to fight to get the language of the last colonizers, the Spanish, put back in, you know? I mean, but at least their Spanish had been influenced by, I think they were the Taino Indians that came before them that were there, like when Columbus came or whatever. Like, they fought really hard to even hold on to that. And so eventually, because what the United States did as a colonizer, and they took the page directly out of the book from so many other places. It's not like they invented the thing, but the first thing you do is go into schools.
There almost is a playbook for colonizing.
Yeah, I mean, go to England or something. But you go into the schools and you say, nobody in this school, like, we only teach in this language now, and that language is our language. And we only hire teachers who are English now, you know? And that's, the thing is, though, that you rob a culture of so much. The only reason you would do that is to try and destroy a culture.
Right.
And
which is what a colony is.
Yeah.
Colonial expansion.
Yes.
I mean, we all speak, you know, languages descended from Latin because of Roman colonialism.
Yeah, we do. But
Latin was also a language that was derived from parts from Greece and parts from other languages, and can be traced back to...
And it was Indo-European.
Mesopotamian
Yep.
And back to its Indo-European roots.
There's definitely some loan words in there.
We didn't really have a lot of time. I don't think we'll have time to get into the real excitement about language. We focused more on the frustrations and language as a core to culture and how it can be part of cultural erasure. But I think, as to your point before, you know, when you're studying a foreign language now, it's completely different. You learn so much more about it and about the culture through being able to understand the root words. Like, when I studied Italian, I liked to learn the direct translation so that I could, like, take an English sentence and do it in Italian and vice versa. But I also, it was really fun to look into the Italian etymologies of things. Mm-hmm. And I was just having a conversation about this the other day. It's a simple example, but one of the things that I really enjoy about Italian, and some of the other Romance languages are similar, is that the term for, like, I like something is mi piace, mm-hmm. which is a self-reflexive verb, like, to me, it brings pleasure.
Yeah.
And so it's different than saying in English, be like, I really like chocolate.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then like the more direct translation is chocolate brings me pleasure, which is still kind of nice. It's a little bit more romantic. But the direct one is like, mi piace il chocolate, or to me, or yeah. Sorry, one second. To me, pleasure is brought from chocolate.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because just seeing you doing your code switching, where if you spend enough time practicing another language, you get past the like translate it directly in your brain.
Right, you go straight to it.
Yeah, where you're like, no, I just know what it means in that language, and it's going to take me a second to make all the words the same. And the further you get away from English, the harder that process becomes. Do you want to talk about some of your experience studying other languages? What have you got under your belt, man? You're like almost 40 now, and you haven't been idle. So,
I mean, mostly I've studied English, which I find endlessly fascinating.
Far deeper than...
Italian was my main language of study. I took a little French and a little Japanese. I dabbled in Italian, or in Spanish. But I never got beyond the first college level of any of the other languages.
Yeah, but that's good intro,
Right. But at one point in Italian, I could read like a children's book.
Yeah.
And I could ask directions and have a basic conversation, and I was hoping to find a time to go spend a little more time in Italy. Because like my real goal, and I think it's a good standard with any language learner, is to be able to have a dream in another language.
Yeah.
People talked about that experience to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I have had little blurbs where Italian has come up when I was like going through finals and stuff, really cramming. But like to just have an entire experience where English doesn't enter into the equation and it's just this separate part of your brain.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
I still have dreams in French. And I've forgotten more French than I've learned, I guess. I still know a lot. I still can say a lot of things, but I think...
Well, and then if you have a few drinks of red wine, you could probably say even more.
I love...
There's a weird connection between, like, having a drink or just getting a little less sober and speaking in another language. Because you eliminate some of that conscious code switching.
And I've definitely noticed that.
If you've studied and you've repeated and you've got a little handle on the grammar, you can figure some stuff out. Your vocabulary is going to be limited. Yeah,
especially once you learn to think in that language at some point in your life. Like, it's still in there somewhere. Even after a decade or so, it's still a thing. And my father was talking to me in French.
I think 2 months in Italy, I would be a working level of fluency.
That's awesome.
And I would drink a lot of wine and make it easier.
Yeah, exactly. It does help. I think when I was in some anthropology class, I like the way they put it. They said they didn't ask if you were fluent because fluent means a lot of things to a lot of people, and just saying do you speak a language is complicated but they had different levels, right? So they were like, name which languages you can introduce yourself and say hello, right?
Right.
And then what languages could you give directions in and ask questions? And then which languages, finally, could you, like, explain the storyline of a book or a movie in that language to somebody who speaks it and be understood? Like, convey the plot and the general...
that's a good level of fluency.
Yeah. Well, and I think I could do that with French to a certain degree. And no other language except for English, unfortunately. And I how many languages do you think you could introduce yourself and say hi? And where you were from, for instance?
At one point, probably 5. I could do it in in Japanese and French, Spanish, Italian. I think I learned it in German at one point. I've forgotten, but I could get that back in an afternoon.
Yeah. Get the Duolingo out, man.
Yeah.
And just and then be forever haunted by that owl.
If Duolingo didn't have the passive aggressive reminders, I would probably use it more often.
Yeah, I found one called Bling that I've been enjoying. I haven't stopped using it, so I don't know how scary it's gonna get. Like if
that's good though. You doing French?
Oh yeah, I think that they'll like send pictures of my son to me and be like, "You should really keep studying," and I'll be like, "I'm sorry." Like it'll get creepy.
We're outside your window.
Yeah. Duolingo is. I mean, you know. Anyways, yeah.
But language, even just dabbling in languages, be like take a couple Duolingo lessons in German and a couple in Korean. I really want to take their Irish course, learn a little of that, and that was one they added much later because like the Gaelic language groups are very complicated.
Yeah,
and I think they're also Indo-European.
Gaelic is, I believe, Indo-European.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that.
It's not a Romance language, so it wasn't
like, yeah.
If you look at Europe, you have like the Romance languages move from Greece through Italy outward, and then the Celtic languages kind of move up through the Nordic German regions down to the Celtic regions. And they met hundreds of years later in Western Europe.
Yeah. Well, and Gaelic's not gone either, you know. It's pretty amazing.
Oh. And finding out recently how much Irish I am, like I've always identified more with the Irish part of me, and then realized that was pretty much all of me.
But you bring up a great point though, you know, like it's really cool to look at some of that heritage and reconnect to some of those cultures through language. And I would strongly suggest that to people as well. I'm not saying that that's more meaningful or better than learning another language that you don't have a heritage in. I mean, there's obviously a long tradition of learning languages of cultures you don't belong to be able to understand them and translate and communicate and bring communication to other people. And so
I do think everyone should study language, and I don't think it's just our opinion. Like there's so much information on your cognitive benefits, on your potential economic benefits, even as an English speaker studying another language. You know, it can give you a better career, it can give you more diversity. It expands. Like there's far more evidence to the benefit of studying just one language. And it really does trouble me that there are people who resist even studying a second language, who not just that they don't get to it, which I understand because I haven't really got to it, but who like fight against that concept like that. That's really troubling to me.
Yeah, no, it is, and it should be. I mean, I think it's a little scary because it's saying so much more than just I'm more comfortable if people are speaking English. Like it's way more than
I am.
Yeah, of course.
I can fully admit, man, if I'm in a room where everyone's speaking English, I can talk to everyone. It's great.
Yeah, I know what everybody's saying, you know, and I'm present.
I can hear a little bit of Spanish.
Yeah.
My sister speaks a little. My girlfriend is pretty fluent in Spanish.
That's one of those things I could introduce myself.
I love hearing the language.
It's beautiful.
Like even if I don't know, even if I'm like I got a word there, it's just hearing another language and not understanding any of it is still pleasurable to me. It brings me pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever played the Great Language game? I guess there's new iterations of it now, but it's
no.
I was
going to say that even if your goal is not to gain a level of fluency, and it doesn't have to be, but to have fun with it, to think of it as a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And like Duolingo, I think was a brilliant addition because it really made learning a language into a fun game with like nice animations and prizes but beyond, you know, Duolingo has some limitations, and it's mostly I make fun of it for the reminders and then giving up and being like, I guess you don't want to learn this language now. But it made it really fun for me to stay up on my Italian after college. And I went through the entire program on Italian and completed it. And they've since had a few updates, but learning a language and then understanding how the languages have traveled. And that's what gets me really excited. When you look at so many world languages originated in like the Iranian Turkic plateau region, is about what we can narrow it down to. And they went in every direction. Like most of them seem to have moved toward the West and European, but like you said, there's roots in Japanese and there's roots in the Pacific Islander languages. And there's weird orphans that you'll find in completely unrelated languages.
Yeah.
And where we're like, I don't know how this word is the same in, some, indigenous, South American languages as it is in, a European language before they ever met. And you're like, but it's like, it could be a coincidence.
Yeah.
But the way that human history has gone over the last, 30 to 40,000 years of migration, and the travels and the trade that has happened long before anything was written down. Words travel just as much as people.
Absolutely. I mean, there's have you heard about those, like the original language people? I mean, every so often a linguist will come out and say, I figured out some words in the original language. I don't...
Like the language of eating, basically.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people argue against it and think that there is no such thing as an original language. Maybe people always spoke more than one language. Debate. Yeah, I mean,
at one point, moving from like into Homo sapiens as a species, as we started to develop, maybe there was an original language that was, a dozen words for nouns.
Yeah. You hear it, and they have words like water and finger and a few other things. And I mean, it is true that to a certain degree today we can track all the Indo-European languages back to Proto-Indo-European and somewhat reconstruct it, and you can do that with all the other language groups too. And then you can take those and see how those are interrelated and go back before that and then try to do that with those proto-languages. And so I can see the thought behind it for sure. And I'm not a linguist, so I'm not an expert in these things, but it's definitely an interesting thing. So I'm sharing up on our stream here the Language Squad game, but for those of you out there that just want to dip your toe in, this is a game where it'll play different languages for you, just little snippets of a random language, and it'll give you like 4 or 5 answers depending on what difficulty you're playing. It'll give you a few different answers that you can choose from of what I think this is. Is it Albanian? Is it some kind of Hindi or just you'll have to guess based on the sound. And what you go to a lot is, does it sound like a Romance language? Does it sound like a Austronesian language? Or does it sound like some version of some tonal language out of an Asian country often? Or, it's very interesting. And it's really fun. And even just hearing these different languages is really a cool experience. Maybe someday we'll play it on a live stream and see how we do. On beginner level, I'm okay. I wouldn't trust myself on anything past that. All right, well, I think we can start wrapping it up. It's been quite a while, but it's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, and it's another one of those giant topics like food that we can't cover in one conversation, but
absolutely
we can sow some seeds. And
bring
that's the
awareness.
idea with these more informal conversations, and we'll, as we get some of the other recorded episodes up on the channel, you can see what happens when we prepare.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is an area both of us have always been studying.
So if you do stumble on this and you want us to talk about something in particular or got something to say, just leave it in the comments and we'll find it. In the meantime, thank you everybody for tuning in. And I think we'll say goodbye. So.
Yes. Blessed be.